Hello, so I'm going to explain to you in this video how to read the Dashas, and we are going to do so with the help of an example. I'm going to be taking the birth chart of Bill Gates. The Dashas are the most fascinating aspect of Vedic astrology because you can actually predict which life events are likely to unfold. You can also ascertain a time window when it's going to be a good time for you or a bad time for you. That is the beauty of astrology. You can make better decisions. That's one of the greatest advantages. You can ascertain when is the best time for marriage, for your career, when is a good time for travel or education. So you can figure all that out from the Dasha table. So let's begin. My aim in this video is to be able to answer some basic questions. When you read the Dashas, you'd like to know which aspects of life are going to be affected. So that's something we're going to learn. Whether the time is going to be good or bad, that's the other thing, and how to determine that. And how is the Dasha going to be felt? Is it going to be a quick, sudden life event, or is it going to be a prolonged phase of suffering or a prolonged phase of good fortunes? So let's begin. This is the birth chart of Bill Gates, and I'm going to go straight to the Dasha table, and here you'd find time period 1, 2 and 3. As per Vedic terminology, the first time phase is Mahadasha, second is Antardasha, and the third is Planetary. Now this is determined by the exact position of moon. So if you go back to his chart, moon is in the constellation of Uttarapada. The ruler of that constellation is the starting Mahadasha. Now how far have you gone through the Mahadasha will be determined by the degree. Saturn's Mahadasha is of 19 years. That's for everyone. But given the exact position of moon, he might have already gone through a certain section of that 19-year phase of Saturn. So you see that he's not gone through the entire 19 years. After Saturn, he entered Mercury's chapter, which would last for 17 years. And thereafter, he entered Ketu's Mahadasha. So let's pause there. When I talk about Mahadashas, I'm referring to time period 1 changing. So let's step back. Let's look at the Dasha table as a book on your life. In this book, several chapters are written. Those chapters are the Mahadasha. So earlier, he was born under Saturn's chapter, then Mercury, Ketu, Venus, Sun, in this order. And within those Mahadashas, think of the Antardashas as the stories unfolding. I always look at the Antardasha more keenly than the Mahadasha, because the Mahadasha can range anywhere between 6 years to 20 years. So it's a long period of time. But important life events happen in our life which last for just a few months. Like if you're getting married, it's likely to happen over a space of maybe a month or a year at most. So important life events, so if you are going to get promoted, for example, it'll happen just, you'll get to know a few months in advance, and it'll happen very quickly. So Antardashas are very, very important. Most of your important life stories will be determined by who the Antardasha planet is. And then the Planetary, think of this as a subplot. So we have a main chapter, which is the Mahadasha. Then we have the stories unfolding within that chapter. And then we have a subplot going on the side. That's the Planetary. The Planetary can also help you narrow down a specific time phase. And I like to get right into it. His most important life event, that's marriage. He was married on 1st of January 94. At that time, he was going through Venus, Jupiter, and Venus's chapter. Now, Jupiter in his chart is the Darakarak, the planet holding the lowest degree, and that represents our life partner. So if a person is going through the Antardasha of the ruler of the house of marriage, the 7th house, or the Darakarak, the probability of marriage is quite high. When specifically would the probability be high within Jupiter's chapter? When the Planetary is also promising, which Venus is. Venus's chapter is always going to be promising for a man when it comes to marriage, as Venus represents a man's life partner. So every time a person is going through the Antardasha of Venus, the probability of marriage becomes high. So Jupiter being the Darakarak and then Venus being the Planetary. The point I'm trying to highlight is when specifically a certain life event could take place can be narrowed down through the Planetary. Jupiter's Antardasha creates the possibility of companionship, as Jupiter is the Darakarak. But when Venus's Prantadasha is going on, it creates an even greater possibility, and he was married at that time. He was always meant to marry after mid-30s, given Saturn's strong influence on the marriage house. It's ruling the marriage house in both the charts. We will come to more life events from Bill Gates' life. I want to talk a little bit about the basics. See, I've mentioned about how dashas of different planets rule our life. It's common for everyone. So your starting point can be Mars. If you have your moon in the nakshatra of Mrigashira, you would be born under the Mahadasha of Mars. And after Mars, the sequence is from Mars, you'll go to Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, and that's about it. So that's a 120-year cycle. Ketu's Mahadasha lasts for 7 years, followed by Venus for 20, Sun for 6, Moon for 10, Mars for 7, Rahu for 18, Jupiter is 16, Saturn is 19, Mercury 17, and once again we come back to Ketu. So this entire span from Ketu to Mercury is of 120 years. That's how the Dasha table is. So your starting point is determined by the moon constellation. Okay, so when you determine from the Dasha table in the year 25, in the month of June now, which Mahadasha, Antadasha and Prantadasha planet are currently ruling your life. Once you determine that, now which aspects of life are going to be affected by these planets? So let's start with the Antadasha. Always, as a methodology, follow these guidelines. Always firstly look at the houses they occupy. So if a planet, for example, is Saturn, its Antadasha is going on, and Saturn is found in the marriage house, and you are in your 20s, there's every chance during Saturn you're going to face some difficulty in getting married, because that's the inherent nature of Saturn, and the aspect of life that's affected is the 7th house. You must also look at the houses ruled by these planets. And then how is the Dasha going to be? Is it going to be a good Dasha or a bad Dasha? That would be determined by, firstly, the nature of the planet. Planets like Saturn, Rahu, Mars and Ketu are known to create complications in our life. With Saturn, there can be frustrating delays. With Rahu and Ketu, we can go through significant life events which happen suddenly, and they change the course of our life. Whereas on the other side, Venus and Jupiter are linked to growth opportunities, etc., etc. So the understanding of planets is important. You'll find all the information on every planet, if you'd like, on the first article on the blog of Far, Far Away. Now, the other very, very important exercise you need to do is to look at the Dasha planet and its position there in your chart. The house, but more than that, the sign and the nakshatra they occupy. For example, in the case of Bill Gates, he has Sun in the constellation of Swati. Now, if you have been a student of Vedic Astrology, you would know Sun is debilitated in this constellation. I dislike using the word debilitated and exalted. For academic reasons, I'm using it. In readings, I never use it because then we start having an extreme view of planetary positions. In any case, Sun Swati isn't a strong position. When he was about to enter Sun's Mahadasha in March the year 2002, 18 to 20 months prior to the beginning of Sun's chapter, whilst he was under Ketu, and I have in other videos or in blog articles mentioned, Ketu is all about detachment. So in that time phase prior to Sun's chapter, he began to move away from the role of a CEO. He stepped down from that role. And by the time he entered Sun's chapter, he was no longer, or during the entire Sun's Mahadasha, given Sun is weak in his chart, he was not the CEO. Steve Ballmer, who he hired in a different time phase, became the CEO, and he was actually kind of reporting to him. So Sun is weak in his chart. Sun symbolizes the position of power we are meant to occupy. Since Sun is weak, during Sun's Mahadasha, he never remained a CEO. In March 2008, he moved into Moon's Mahadasha, and Moon in his chart is in the constellation of Uttabhadapada. Now, if you analyze Moon Uttabhadapada and its position, you'd understand this is a combination belonging to social workers. I've mentioned that repeatedly. Whenever Moon and Saturn have a relationship in your chart, you're going to be very inclined to serve the society, and Uttabhadapada is ruled by Saturn. So he was in the year 2008, he started taking his first active steps towards the social welfare sector. So he started a foundation and he fully transitioned out of his role at Microsoft to start working for the society, essentially. Do you see how perfectly his life is aligning with the change of chapters? I'm referring to the Mahadasha changes that are taking place from Sun to Moon. From the beginning of Sun's chapter, he lost his position as the CEO, or he chose not to be in that position. Circumstances created the need for him to step down. And then under Moon Uttaparapada, linked to social welfare, he started a foundation and started investing his time on a full-time basis on serving the society. So you can determine which effects the dashas are going to have on you based on the nature and the position of the planet in your chart. When I'm referring to the position of planet, please also take into account the positions in the Navamsha and the Samsha chart. Have a holistic picture. These are the houses that can be affected. This is the position of a planet in all three charts. I always take into account the main Navamsha and the Samsha, and then anticipate, okay, these houses are likely to be affected and this is the likely effect. I know it can be a bit complicated. If your basics are strong, you can determine what might unfold in your life. Let's take a few examples from his life in the year 1975. Right at the beginning of Ketu's Mahadasha, he decided to step aside from his educational program at Harvard to start an IT firm. Ketu being linked to letting go of things, and Ketu's Mahadasha was going on at the time when he let go of his educational program. And educational programs are, in my view, are linked to Jupiter and Mercury and Ketu share a relationship in the Navamsha. Do you see that? He was meant to break status quo and do something significant, and suddenly, when you give up on your educational program, it's not a prolonged exercise, it happens suddenly, and that is what Rahu and Ketu's chapters or dashas are known for. Now, within this chapter, Ketu's Mahadasha under Saturn's Antardasha, he hired Steve Ballmer, the one who would later become the CEO of Microsoft. Now, why is this important? I've just recently posted a video on the meaning of the 7th house, and I've mentioned the 7th house is all about partnerships, and the 7th house in his chart in both the main and the Navamsha is ruled by Saturn. So do you see here? So whilst you are going through the Antardasha, the story section of your life linked to the 7th house, there's every chance of you either starting a relationship or a business partnership. So he hired Steve Ballmer somewhat as a partner, as he later became a partner. An interesting life event, under Venus's Mahadasha thereafter, he had success after success, and Venus in his chart is in Vishakha in the 4th house. His idea was to come up with a product which can be used in the household, to bring computing power in the household, essentially. And household products are seen from the 4th house, and the 4th and the money house is jointly ruled by Venus. So do you see that too? That during Venus's chapter, and Venus is super strong in his chart, in Vishakha and in its own sign. During Venus's Mahadasha, he made money by selling a household product, essentially. That's how I see it. But one particular time phase, Antardasha, that I'd like to highlight, and that's Mercury. Venus's Mahadasha and Mercury's Antardasha. What happened there? Mercury is ruling the 3rd house in his chart and the 12th house in Chitra. If you combine all of this, you'd find the person to be a creative storyteller, or someone who likes to express an opinion in the public domain. A Mercury Chitra-like person, someone who has an art of storytelling. During Mercury's Prantadasha, he wrote one of his best-selling books, Business at the Speed of Thought. What I'm trying to say is, under Mercury's Antardasha, given your life stage, it depends what might unfold. If you're a young person in your teenage, for example, Mercury's Antardasha can lead to you starting a learning program. If you are in your 20s, you could be starting your master's program. Later in your life, you can, under Mercury, take up a certification program. Alternatively, if you have combinations suggesting you have some artistic talent, which Bill Gates does, you can also publish your views or write a book, for example. So this was a good time for him to be converting his ideas into a story, and he published that book. So you can again link that life event with the Dasha. His life can be perfectly explained by the Dasha. Let's talk about May 2021, when he was going through Mars, Saturn and Rahu. Now, I've earlier mentioned if you do a generic analysis, Mars, Saturn and Rahu's chapter can be a very difficult time, as all three planets can create complication. That's their general effect. Now, the most important amongst them is Saturn, as that is the Antardasha. I have always stressed that I look very closely at the Antardasha planet. Now, Saturn is ruling this house of marriage in both the charts, in the main and the Navamsha, and Rahu, incidentally, is also ruling it in the Navamsha. So if this time was difficult, it was meant to be difficult for his personal life. Unfortunately, he separated from his wife. He could have had a difficult time in his marriage even under Moon and Saturn's chapter. So if you have Saturn ruling the marriage house, the Antardashas of Saturn can pose some challenges in your marriage. And now recently he's entered Rahu's Mahadasha, and Ketu in the house of money in the main chart is detaching him from money. And every time Rahu's Mahadasha is going on, Ketu is also having an impact, as Rahu and Ketu are one and the same energy, the opposite side of the same energy. So what he's done now, that he's made a pledge to give away all his money in the next 15-20 years. Under Rahu's Mahadasha, we always tend to do things which are extraordinary, which are unconventional, which don't conform to societal norms. So he is doing that now under Rahu. He started a new chapter. The other interesting thing I should have mentioned previously is Moon is in the constellation of Uttarapada. The Dasha table is based on the progression of Moon. This is important for you to understand. So when I said he moved into Ketu's Mahadasha in 1975, around that time, his Moon had progressed from Uttarapada to Ashwini. Do you see that? I've mentioned there on the top, Moon is progressing through now to the constellation of Ashwini, and since Ashwini is ruled by Ketu, he's going through Ketu's 7-year time phase. And it goes on from there. Moon continues to progress. After having spent 7 years of Ketu, Moon is now progressing through the constellation, the nakshatra Bharani, which was a 20-year Mahadasha Venus. Now, if you see his life, he invented something. An invention is directly linked to the constellation of Bharani. What I'm trying to say is, when you're looking at the Mahadashas, keep in view through which constellation is your Moon progressing through. That would naturally be dependent on the position of Moon in your chart, and that's that. If you do a very basic analysis of his chart, Mars ruling the 5th and the 10th in the constellation of Hasta in the 3rd house, let's just do this planetary position. Now, this immediately is an indication that the person can be an entrepreneur. Firstly, Mars is directly linked to entrepreneurship. The 3rd house is linked to entrepreneurship, and even the constellation of Hasta is directly linked to entrepreneurship. With Hasta, you also get the individual being highly skillful and like an inspiration to people, like a technocrat of some kind. The Sun isn't very strong. Saturn is exalted. It's in a super strong position, which highlights that he's a highly resilient person. And Saturn, incidentally, is also the ruler of his rising constellation Pusha, which makes him a very wise old man kind of a person. And with Moon Uttarapada, I also see something similar. And Mercury Chitra, Venus in its own sign, are signs behind his ability to come up with innovative ideas. And with Rahu there in Jyeshta, could possibly be why he's a bit disliked. As a Rahu Jyeshta-like person can be a self-proclaimed leader of some kind, and the person can also be quite forceful with one's views. So that's just a summary of his chart. The idea behind this video was to learn how to read the Dasha through his life. I'm hoping the life events taken from his life made sense from the Dasha table. And if there were some doubts, please post a comment. And if you'd like to stay in touch, please subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching, and for now.